So I think when we were talking to you about which film you might want to come and introduce as part of the season, we talked about a few. I think Producers was one that you talked about at one point. But in the end, you ended on a sort of an equally offensive one with Life of Brian.
I think it hadn't occurred to me until we were talking about what I was maybe going to choose. That what I like is stuff that is really funny, both Producers and this really funny and really silly, but that are pushing at the boundaries a little bit, which this one definitely does.
And with Death of Stalin, you definitely did that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think you can say that. Yeah. 20 million people died. Let's laugh. I mean, it was the sort of that there was this film was sort of in our minds. I mean, there were two films that were in our minds. Well, we sort of thought with Stalin, we thought it's a genre of its own at first because we were very frightened in a way. You know, can you make jokes about that sort of area? And then the only two films that we thought that might sort of be, well, I suppose it's Producers, Strangelove, and this film here, which sort of gave us reassurance that, well, maybe it is possible to do a film that's really funny, but that's tackling sort of a difficult area.
But having said that, at the time when this film came out, if you had been coming to see it at the cinema, there's a very good chance, depending on where you live, that you may have had placards outside and people demonstrating against it, and in some cases local councils refusing to play it, overruling the BBFC and saying, we're not going to allow this to be played in our county at all. Can you remember when you first saw it? Did you see it at the time when it first came out?
Yeah, I must have, my abiding memory of it is a guy at uni, so we didn't call it uni in those days, university. So my first year, that was 1980, and a guy called Paul Painter, I don't know if he's in tonight, he probably is, but he knew it by heart, and I must have seen it already because I remember being very irritated by him constantly quoting it. Although I suppose it's worse if you haven't seen it, for the 4 people that haven't seen it.
There's more than 4. I've said there's quite a few hands went up actually.
Wow, I find that incredible, but I suppose it's a sort of generational thing.
Obviously, going to berate our audience for not watching the movie. It's great they've saved it for the big screen.
Yeah, of course. No, so I presume I saw it in the cinema, but when I was. So my first year at 1980, I knew it really well. You just knew it really well. I mean, obviously there wasn't the huge diversity of entertainment that we have on offer nowadays. Young people, we had 3 channels and some picture houses. So it was a sort of cultural thing. And yeah, you were aware that it was very controversial, which was one of the ways it was appealing. But because Monty Python was itself such a cultural icon and people loved Monty Python, it had the sort of impetus and the velocity that meant it could get, it had a success beyond the controversy.
I'm part of the generation that when the film came out, I used to have a record of it. I didn't have I didn't have a VHS at that point. We had a lot of things on vinyl. We had all the Monty Python TV shows on vinyl, Fawlty Towers on vinyl.
Right.
So I'd actually heard it before I saw it, if that makes sense.
Right. I'm tempted to do that Monty Python sketch about you didn't have a VHS, you were lucky.
Yes, right. Yeah, the 4 Yorkshiremen.
Yeah, the 4 Yorkshiremen. That's right. But yeah. So.
But you're right in the sense it's definitely one of those films that people definitely quote from, isn't it? And actually a lot of them have just kind of got into our ordinary parlance. And in fact, with the song, which we won't spoil at what part, but I can't imagine people don't know, but the song always look on the bright side of life. Yeah. I mean, that's become part of our kind of national kind of fervour.
And I think one of the reasons I went with this one, I mean, there's reasons why I just rewatched it a week ago just to check it was still funny and because that would be awkward and not offensive, and it has dated. So the first scene I sit down and there's John Cleese is blacked up. So just to warn you that I completely disassociate myself from that. And there's a couple of jokes that you think, well, I don't think they're acceptable now.
I mean, I guess all for particularly kind of comedy films, you have to kind of look through the lens of when they were made, I guess. I mean, we had the same thing with Trading Place a few nights ago, when Dan Aykroyd kind of blacks up as a Jamaican in a train carriage at one point, and you just have to think, well, at that time, and would we do it now? Well, probably not. And I guess that's the same with this, isn't it?
So there is that, but at the same time, I think it's become incredibly contemporary again. for me anyway, so I'm a person of the left, I'm on the left, I'm Jewish as well, and so sort of anti-Semitism and Labour, I'm sort of right in the midst of all that, and I'm always quoting because you've got the Jewish voice for Labour who won't talk to the Jewish Labour movement, and then the Jews against anti-Semitism who won't talk to the anti-Semitism Jews, and it's exactly like, as you'll see if you haven't seen it, the People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front, and splitters, and people are shouting splitters, and the Corbynites are shouting at the Blairites, and everyone's shouting. And so there's something terrifyingly contemporary about it if you're in left politics, but also something that's sort of timeless, like with the "What have the Romans ever done for us?" Which again I won't quote, but there's what have the Tories ever done for us? Well, there was equal marriage. Yeah, but apart from equal marriage, actually that's probably about it. But so it doesn't quite work. But there's what's great about this film is the satire, and then satire and silliness, and just enjoying the silliness, not being earnest in your comedy, but still making the point, and that's why it works so well.
And there was a lot of kind of controversy around the film when it first came out, and there was that very famous TV debate with Malcolm Muggeridge and I can't remember. I mean, obviously it was two of the Pythons. I think it was John and Michael, but I can't remember who else was in the. But basically there was a lot of kind of ecclesiastical concerns, shall we say? But it was coming from people who hadn't seen the film, and I think a lot of people had thought, and obviously it is a sort of satire about Christ, but actually, he's never portrayed as being Christ. I mean, Christ appears in the film, and he is very clearly a false Messiah, kind of an unwitting Messiah, if you know.
And that's the genius of the film, that it isn't really about Christ at all. It's about the population and the gullibility of people following Christ, and that it's happening at the same time, but Christ is peripheral to it, and I think that's what's so clever about it, that it's satire, and that's why that Malcolm Muggeridge debate really, you can see Michael Palin, who's close showbiz pal of mine now, because he was in Stalin, getting really upset because it wasn't about Christ, it was about gullible people, which still applies today. Michael Palin, incidentally, that's another reason why I chose this film, because I think Michael Palin is one of the great underrated comic actors, British comic actors, partially because he's so lovely that he just went off and did this sort of travel stuff. But if you look at his performances in this film, there's the well-known where he's the guy who hands out the crosses at the crucifixion. And that is a character in itself that could have its own film, its own sitcom. It's so really well researched. But he does, possibly one of my favourite moments of the film, just from a sort of directing, acting point of view, is he does a little character, one of the preacher characters, who's it's so, I mean, and you'll see it's so precise and like little, he's not really good, but he's trying to do it. And it's such a it's one of the, for me, that little scene is one of the most beautiful comic performances in British comedy. I mean, and Michael is exceptional. But that's why, so, sorry, I'm really waffling now, but he got so upset about that interview. And I think what got me into Monty Python was, because I'm a few years later on than the people who just loved Monty Python, was Not the 9 O'Clock News doing a sketch where they reversed that. So the controversy was that people were insulting the comic messiah John Cleese, JC. And the
initials were the same.
So the initials were the same. And they'd have made this whole religion that even had the same initials of the messiah as the comic messiah. And I thought, well, what's this about? And that's when I realised just how brilliant they were.
And one of the sort of treats in the film as well is that there's a little cameo by Spike Milligan, who apparently just happened to be in Tunisia at the time when they were making it, and they just kind of brought in and was in there for a few hours, and I think they kind of lost him again after that, didn't come back again, and they just had him for a few moments. Yeah,
I mean, it is a treat in many ways because it's Spike Milligan, but for me, I don't enjoy it so much because it's surprisingly well structured. If you look at a Holy Grail, really funny film, but that feels more like sketches. But this one, it's really keeps going, and there's not many wasted moments. And the Spike Milligan moment, he's obviously a god, but I just think if it weren't Spike Milligan, it would be cut. Sorry, Spike, because you are a
I mean,
genius,
you have got those moments in there, like the Spike Milligan bit, or some of the there's an animation sequence as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit silly.
Which kind of jump you back into reality. But in a sense, even though it has got this sort of strong narrative arc, it is a sort of sense, in a sense, it is a series of sketches itself, though, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, so I did a sort of in conversation with Michael Palin the other day, and he was telling me about, or was telling the audience about, how there were these extra sketches that they'd written. For instance, a sketch about a doctor, and Lazarus comes to the doctors, and the doctor is just furious because, you know, all these people are saying, "Why didn't you bring me back from the dead?" And they said they didn't put that, and Michael said they didn't put that in because it wasn't, that was more about Christ, and although it was funny, and I think when they did the Holy Grail, they probably would have included it, it wasn't part of the narrative. So I sort of think what's great about this, it is, yes, it's sketches, if you look at the Romans go home moment, for instance, or the Jehovah, which I brought up as quite a religious Jew. That's probably the first time I've actually said that word out loud, so I still feel I should be stoned for saying it. You know, those are sketches, but they're so well woven in with the story that, which is, I think, a credit to them as filmmakers, and that's why it goes very quickly.
And I mean, we're obviously going to watch any moment now, but I mean, the other thing, you've touched on this already with Michael Palin, but they are actually really, really good performances by them as well as writing it.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I think it's Terry Jones who directed this. I know, well, Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam obviously is the animation.
Yeah.
But they all turn in really great performances. And Graham Chapman turns in a fantastic performance. Yeah. Obviously, he, I think, had quite a battle with the booze and so forth before then. And here, I think, you know, he'd kind of sobered up and he brings in a great turn. Terry Jones as his mother is fantastic.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah. Again, problematic. I mean, there are actresses out there that are funny. But yeah, I mean, no, it's and Mike was saying that John Cleese wanted the main role at one point, but then when Graham came along and did it, they could see that it was made such sense, and it would have been really sad not to have John Cleese playing a lot of the sort of parts that he plays. One of my favourite moments is John's look when, I mean, without giving too much away, when Bigus Dickus reveals that he has a speech impediment as well. Again, problematic. But just that tiny little look is just comedy gold. So yeah.
And the other thing you get out of this, which is quite rare, is you get quite a lot, well, not a lot, but you get more than you would usually get of Terry Gilliam on screen, because most of his stuff is behind the camera, and you have him as the jailer's assistant, don't you, in there?
Yeah.
That weird sort of sinister laugh. And
yeah, exactly. So it's great to see Terry Gilliam. I mean, again, you've got this sort of, they're so diverse, because you've got Terry Gilliam, that part is so huge and over the top. And then you've got the sort of, the beautiful realism of Michael Palin's performance. And that by the time they were making this film, they knew exactly where their strengths were and how to weave it into a sort of cohesive whole, which is why this film is better. I mean, that Meaning of Life, the film they did after it, has some great moments, but this was their sort of peak, I think.
Yeah, Meaning of Life is definitely a sketch film. I mean, it's just set up as that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, as you say, I mean, I think in terms of, if you're looking for a proper film with a beginning, a middle, and then something that flows properly, and actually for me, there's not really a moment where it lulls. I mean, it kind of keeps that momentum going all the whole way through. I think Life of Brian is it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And sorry, the very, very last thing I was going to say was actually about handmade films, about the fact that this is the film that was financed by George Harrison and Dennis O'Brien, wasn't it? Because George Harrison, the ex-Beatle, was a big Python fan, and to make this film, obviously, they did a whole lot of money, and he actually kind of came to the rescue.
Yeah, that's right. I think they were finding funding quite hard to get because it was a slightly controversial subject matter, and he just said, all right, how much do you need? Which is great. You can do that if you're a Beatle, apparently.
Yeah, apparently you can.
Yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much for being here. We're going to watch the film now, but a huge thank you to David Schneider. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Enjoy it.